From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, September 19, 2025. Anthony Albanese is packing his bags to fly to New York for the United Nations General Assembly vote on recognising Palestine as a state. But opinion polls in the West Bank show Palestinians won't support Australia's key demand for recognition, the reform of the Palestinian Authority. That story, based on a report by the Australia, Israel and Jewish Affairs Council, is an exclusive live now at theaustralian.com.au. An ambitious climate goal that gives us just 10 years to halve our emissions. Today, the gritty politics behind a bold new number the Prime Minister hopes will soothe the hardheads, calm the zealots and keep him in a job. Already the opposition's saying no way. So, can leader Susan Lee survive yet another climate war? Today, our political editor, Jeff Chambers, joins me to dig into the issue that has a nasty habit of killing political careers. Jeff Chambers is The Australian's political editor. Jeff, a huge day in the story of climate in Australia, and this is the issue that has killed off a bunch of prime ministers. It's cruelled the careers of opposition leaders. It's been incredibly difficult for Australians to get their heads around because this issue is so complex. What's your kind of first thought about this 62 to 70% target that the government's come up with?
Australians shouldn't kid themselves. We've heard a lot from Anthony Albanese, Chris Bowen and Jim Chalmers about hitting this 62 to 70% emissions reduction by 2035. I mean, we're already struggling to hit both emissions reduction and our 82% renewables in the grid by 2030 targets. It's a big ask for anyone to believe that the government will be able to deliver on such greater ambition. Let's be real, the 70% is to try and spoil the Greens and the Teals, the climate activist groups, who, by the way, haven't bought it. The real figure here is 62%.
So let's just break that down. That means Australia needs to dramatically cut its emissions of greenhouse gases starting today. And by 2050, we've promised the world will be at net zero emissions. People say that a lot, net zero. This is what it actually means. It means greenhouse gas emissions are massively reduced by doing things like cutting fossil fuels, and then they're also balanced out by the removal of greenhouse gases through means like growing forests, restoring wetlands and changing farming practices. The idea is that when you balance it all up, there's effectively no greenhouse gases, and therefore no more climate change.
This is a responsible target, backed by the science, backed by a practical plan to get there, and built on proven technology. It's the right target to protect our environment.
To hear Anthony Albanese talk about it, you'd think climate policy is pretty straightforward. But we all know in Australian politics it's a leader killer.
The greatest moral and economic challenge we will face in the 21st century is climate change.
Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme went south, and so did his prime ministership.
I hope I've been able to demonstrate to you that this has been a very busy 2.5 years.
Julia Gillard blew herself up with a carbon tax.
It will be easier for the next woman and the woman after that and the woman after that, and I'm proud of that.
Malcolm Turnbull went too fast.
I started to sink into a very, very deep depression.
Tony Abbott tried to rein it all in.
There'll be no wrecking, no undermining and no sniping.
And then in 2022, Climate 200 and the Teals helped Labor wipe out Scott Morrison. And yet now, the old ideas are coming back around.
Well, I think obviously we can go back to the carbon tax, and the irony of that is now we've got the Productivity Commission and miners themselves and big business saying we probably need a carbon price to be hitting the targets that we're talking about now. So in the space of just over a decade, it's funny how things can move so quickly. And I think the real pressure point is that if they don't get it right, they don't get enough renewables, enough batteries in there, the technology is not up to scratch, we'll see blackouts. And I think Blackouts is poison in politics. And the other big question is, as we bring in data centres and try and drive AI here in Australia, you need a lot of power. And that's where this question over the future of nuclear power rests, because so many other similar Western democracies and countries, a lot of their emissions reductions promises are underpinned by zero emissions nuclear. So I think that's the sort of challenge ahead.
Labor and Anthony Albanese could have released this target before the election. By the time the next election rolls around, presumably they're hoping Australians will have moved on. Was that a bit sneaky?
Well, it wasn't honest, let's put it that way. You got to remember, back in November 2024, Peter Dutton had increased the coalition's primary vote up to 40%. Labor was at 31%. Things were not looking good for the government. So they were concerned that this perception they were going so hard on net zero and these targets could have a really bad impact for them in seats like the Hunter, which is a traditional coal mining area.
Quietly, the government told the Treasury to do economic modelling on a number, a 65% reduction by 2035. That was a lot lower than what the Climate Change Authority wanted. Albanese had to balance the fears of some in his cabinet that Labor would go too fast, and on the other hand, pressure from some Labor voters to go faster. Jeff and the other journos have been given a giant pile of official advice and modelling to work through, and buried in there is the evidence of just how hard even this is going to be.
And there is a little list in the Climate Change Authority advice, and it says, look, even just to get to 62%, we're going to have to halve Australia's current emissions levels. We're already struggling to cut emissions levels, quadrupling wind capacity, tripling utility solar capacity, doubling rooftop and distributed solar capacity. That half of the light vehicles sold between now and 2035 would have to be electric vehicles. Somehow we're going to produce more sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel, electrifying. The list goes on. Ceasing logging of old growth forests and halving re-clearing rates. When you read these lists, it makes you really understand that it's going to be really hard. And also, Chris Bowen is relying on so much technology that doesn't exist. They've had to sort of walk back their hopes for green hydrogen because it hasn't developed like they thought it might. And I think that's the problem. There's a lot of bets going on and a lot of assumptions going on. We still don't have a price tag on how much this is going to cost. We hear about the economic benefits, but I think a lot of Australians want to know, what is this going to cost us financially? And is this going to have an impact on our reliable energy?
Coming up, so can Susan Lee's leadership survive this hotter-than-hot issue? And what about Susan Lee? She's struggling to even hold the coalition party room together on this issue.
So immediately after Anthony Albanese announced his new, very ambitious 2035 target, Susan Lee and Ted O'Brien delivered a scathing press conference. They've completely rejected the 2035 target on the grounds that the government aren't even close to coming to hitting their existing 2030 targets. If you can't adopt an ambitious 2035 target, you are not going to get to net zero by 2050. This is a thorn in the side of Susan Lee. It's clear to me that Susan Lee's leadership is likely untenable unless the current policy of supporting net zero by 2050 is rejected. But in saying that, they obviously need to have alternatives that Dan Tehan and others prepare. And it can't be the same nuclear policy. It has to be an entirely different approach where, for the sake of the moderates, who, by the way, they're the ones that did the numbers and got Susan Lee the leadership, those people are very strongly saying, how on earth can we win back any seats in metropolitan Australia without some sort of climate change and energy policy that can win votes? In the Nats, in the Libs, across the joint party room, they're at such extreme different positions. I do believe that if Susan Lee wants to remain leader over the coming period, that she is going to have to move this process faster. I think that Labor's 2035 target announcement presents an opportunity for the coalition to prosecute a case, but they have to prosecute that with facts, economic facts, proper modelling, and argue the point. They can't just be shrill and just jump up and down. They're going to have to present a viable alternative, and I think that's a really big challenge for them.
Jeff Chambers is The Australian's political editor. You can read all our analysis right now at theaustralian.com.au. And come back to the front tomorrow for something completely different, inside the economics of showbiz, as we hit the road with a Netflix boy band trying to make fame a reality in real life.